All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. We are right into November and moving through the week pretty quickly. We still have a lot of events to come up this week, and we just had a newsletter come out on Monday. So do take a look at the rest of the month because it is jam-packed, full of live events that your classrooms can join into or tune into some of those recordings afterwards. So today we're going to take a little virtual field trip to Vermont. We're going to head to the Vermont Institute of Sciences, where their mission is to motivate individuals to care for the natural environment through education, research, and avian wildlife rehabilitation. So they operate New England's premier avian wildlife rehabilitation clinic at the center. They've been a leader in environmental education and wildlife conservation and care since 1972. We have Maya standing by backstage. I'm going to bring her in right now. Hey, Maya, how are you?
Great. How are you guys?
Excellent. It's really great to have you joining us live today.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have a great group of classrooms. I see a whole bunch tuning in via YouTube. So if you want to use the chat sidebar, send us in a hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. You can also send questions in via the chat bar. Then we have a great group of classrooms backstage. I'm going to bring a few of them in here right now. If you guys want to give a big wave. Good to have you with us today. There they are. All right. Questions a little bit later. But for now, Maya, I want to let you take over and let's learn a little bit about some birds of prey.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me. Again, my name is Maya, and I'm here to chat with you guys about birds, as it's one of our specialties here at VINS. But not just any birds. We kind of specialize in a particular group of birds that we call raptors, or birds of prey is another name for them. Specifically, we're talking about eagles, hawks, falcons, owls, and depending on the scientist you ask, sometimes vultures as well. So all of these birds have some really cool things in common that make them successful predators. That's right. Bird of prey does not mean that they're eating salads, but it does mean that they are predators. They are carnivores, meaning that they are eating other animals to survive. And they have some traits in common that allow them to be successful predators. And some of those traits we're going to go over with some of the guests that I have for you guys to meet. So if we're ready, I'm going to get our first guest and be right back on camera. All right. So we have our first guest here. She's a fantastic example of what makes raptors raptors, what makes them different from other kinds of birds. Like all birds, she's got feathers, she's got a beak and legs, but there's some things that make raptors a little different, even from some of our other birds that also are predators, that also eat other animals. The first is how she's finding her food. And as you can see, our lovely red-shouldered hawk here, she has kind of intense forward-facing eyes. She's kind of got an intense gaze, much like us and many other animals that rely on our vision to navigate and to find our food. Sheer vision is incredibly important to how she's finding her dinner. Some of our hawks and eagles and falcons, they have amazing vision, specifically at the details that they can see at long distances. So if you could see through her eyes, you might be able to see something like your favorite book and be able to read it from across a football field. Huge long distances that you are able to actually see and look at with those high details using her supervision. But vision is what allows her to find her dinner. For a bird like her, she's going to be hunting things like small little rodents, things like mice and squirrels, and maybe even also some small things like lizards and snakes, kind of like spaghetti for these birds. And so she can eat lots of things. She uses her eyesight to find them, but then she's got to catch them. She has big, beautiful wings that she can use to glide down from her favorite treetop perch down to grab that food with her talons. Those long curved claws at the ends of each toe are what allow her to grab onto her food and squeeze down as hard as she can and then carry it back to her favorite perch. Now, with red-shouldered hawks specifically, I said they like to eat lots of different things, but one of my favorite foods of theirs to highlight is actually toads. And here in the eastern United States, where we can find red-shouldered hawks, our toads here have poison glands on the back of their head, so that when a predator tries to eat them, they secrete this poison onto their skin so that the predator trying to eat it either thinks, this tastes gross, or they might try to eat it anyway and get very sick. And then they figure out that, yeah, toads are kind of icky. It really wasn't worth it getting sick after eating it, so I'm never going to eat a toad again. But red-shouldered hawks eat toads all the time, and they're very successful at doing so, which is unique. So let's imagine this red-shouldered hawk. She swoops down through the forest to grab a toad, squeezes it with those strong talons of hers, and then carries it back to her favorite treetop perch, where, this is the fun part, scientists weren't sure exactly what they were doing to successfully eat toads until a few years ago when they actually saw how they were doing it. And they saw this red-shouldered hawk use their beak. That long curved point at the end of her beak is another raptor adaptation for kind of tearing apart large prey into bite-sized pieces, because they don't have teeth like you and I do to chew our food. Instead, she uses that beak, though, for toads to peel them like a banana. And while it's kind of icky to think about peeling a toad, it's actually very smart, because that toxin on their skin is only skin deep. If they remove the skin, they can eat all of the toad muscle underneath. And so again, it's kind of icky, but it's an amazing adaptation, a trait that these birds have learned how to hunt something that most other predators can't. And so our red-shouldered hawk here, she has all of the makings of an amazing raptor. She's got the perfect vision, she's got the sharp talons, and she's got that nice pointed beak. And so this specifically is Ithaca. She came to us from Ithaca, New York. We name all of our birds after where they came to us from. And you may have noticed when she's kind of sitting here readjusting herself that she's feathers are looking kind of scruffy this time of the year. Her tail especially, kind of those feathers are obviously meant to be nice and straight and flat and form a nice solid tail that she can use to fly. And she's missing most of her wing feathers. This, unfortunately, is because she fell ill with a disease known as West Nile virus when she was very, very young. She was still in the nest. She fell ill, and thankfully, she had the support of veterinary staff at the nearby Cornell University's Raptor Lab. They have a number of students there working to help wildlife and practice their veterinary skills as they're learning. So Ithaca here had immediate help to get through it, because most birds of prey, when they're young, don't survive fighting infection of West Nile virus. But Ithaca was thankfully able to make it, but she didn't make it out unscathed. Because she was still young and growing and developing all those feathers, she wasn't able to develop those feather follicles properly. So now she grows in a beautiful new set of feathers every year, like all of our raptors do, but those feathers start to break and crumble and fall apart from that upper part of the feather down. So she can't fly most of the year, which is why she's here with us. But now, do you guys have any questions about our red-shouldered hawk, or Ithaca specifically?
Okay, I think we could do a quick check-in with our crews and see if you're tuning in via YouTube and you have any questions about Ithaca, pop them into the chat. But let's check in with a few classes here. Let's try Mrs. Fisher's class to start.
Hi there, this is Annika.
How do you guys have to travel a lot to like see the birds and stuff?
Do we travel a lot? I travel a lot with some of these birds to go to schools and libraries and other places, usually in Vermont and New Hampshire, kind of nearby. And I travel with some of the birds to do education like this, but in person.
Thank you.
All right, great question. Let's see, Miss Becker's crew in San Diego. Do you have a quick question?
Hi, my name's Leia. How young was she when she had her disease?
Yeah, when did she fall ill? She was probably only a month or two old. She was fairly young. She still kind of had all of her baby down, was still in the nest. Yeah.
All right, let's check in. We've got a class hanging out with us in Mexico. Let's see if they have a question for us about Ithaca.
My name is Mateo. What is his fastest speed?
The fastest speed these birds can fly? Probably only around 30 to maybe 40 miles per hour on the really upper extreme.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool. Oh, we've got a couple comments in the chat. Let's check really quickly. Asher is wondering if the red-shouldered hawk, do they fly a lot? Do they spend a lot of time flying?
Yeah, so a lot of our hawks, like our red-shouldered hawk here, a lot of these guys like to sit and wait. They like to sit up high in the trees and use their eyesight to find prey that moves by them on the ground below. So they're a little bit more secretive, but some of these raptors do migrate. That means they fly south for the winter and then fly back north in the summertime. And a lot of these birds, they can fly pretty long distances during that particular season. But when they're hunting, they're really sedentary, unlike some of our other raptors.
All right. Olivia is wondering if you happen to know how many hawks there are in the world, different species.
Yeah, I think there are around, I believe it's around 200 species. I'd have to look up for the exact number, but it's around 200 or so.
All right, perfect. And
Yeah.
maybe one last question for Ithaca. Valo wants to know how old Ithaca is.
She is 7 years old.
All right, awesome. Well, great. That was so cool to see Ithaca. Do you have any more friends for us today?
I do. I have a couple more, so I'm going to bring her back, and then I'll bring out our next guest.
Perfect.
All right. Right. So we were talking about raptors, predators, birds of prey. This is, in fact, a bird of prey. This is a predator. This is actually North America's smallest falcon. This is the American kestrel. And this particular American kestrel might be kind of chatty while we're standing here, so apologies if you have a hard time hearing me. But this little American kestrel here, he is a falcon, and falcons are kind of world famous for being some of the fastest animals in the world. In particular, they use their speedy flight to be able to help them catch their food. So they have all the basic raptor features, the eyes, the beak, the talons, but they've kind of specialized in hunting fast. Now, for a small little predator like him, he's absolutely hunting little things, absolutely mice, right? Every predator wants to eat a mouse. But also maybe things like bugs, insects, right? Crickets, grasshoppers, cicadas. He can even catch dragonflies out of the air. And something that falcons are well renowned for hunting as well is other birds. And so despite being relatively small himself, he can still hunt some pretty impressive things, from little songbirds like chickadees and sparrows and finches to even something as big as he is, like a mourning dove. Now, mourning doves are pretty impressive in size, and though they look kind of round and slow and chubby, doves and pigeons are actually muscular birds. If you ever watch videos of them flying, they can do backflips from a stand. And so, in order to catch those kinds of birds, our falcons have to be really, really fast. Now, he only weighs about as much as a deck of cards might sitting on your hand. But this deck of cards could dive or stoop after his prey at 70 miles per hour, which is crazy fast for a small bird like him, but allows him to catch up to his small prey. And so he uses his impressive speed to dive after his food, but then he catches it, of course. He's got those talons too, despite his relatively small feet. And his small feet are perfect for bugs and mice and small things, but they're not quite big enough to really get a hold of something, a mourning dove, which is his size, if not a little bit bigger. And so our falcons have an additional tool up their feathers, and that's actually on their beak. So they have that long point at the end, just like Ithaca did. But on the side of that beak, on either side, there's an extra little point that he uses in pretty much the same way that some of our other predators do, the ones that have big canine teeth. Those kind of large front-facing teeth on wolves and lions and tigers, they bite into the necks of their prey. So does he. He has those extra little notches, and they fit perfectly between the neck bones of that mourning dove. So he can bite the back of its neck and turn it into instant dinner. Now, He can dive fast. He can take down his prey fast. And that is the kind of the falcon's specialty, is doing everything at high speed. This little guy here, you might be wondering why he's so chatty. This is Ferrisburg. He came to us from the town of Ferrisburg, Vermont, where, unfortunately for him, he doesn't have a physical injury, is the reason why he came to us, but kind of a behavioral one. See, Ferrisburg here is a little confused. That sound he's making is actually a begging call. Now, most birds in the wild, they only make that begging call when they're babies, right? When mom and dad are there to give them food, this is how they let mom and dad know that this is where my mouth is and this is where you should put the food. But for him, it's kind of like he never left home because unfortunately, someone found a young Ferrisburg, probably just a little fuzzball. Maybe he fell out of the nest and some folks found him on the ground and said, oh my gosh, there's a baby bird on the ground. What do we do? And they thought, well, we'll pick him up. We'll bring him home and we'll raise him ourselves. Unfortunately, this isn't a great idea because Ferrisburg here, he needs to look and listen to who's feeding him when he's young so that he knows he's going to grow up to be a big, strong bird of prey. Unfortunately, though, he saw this family. He saw people. And so he came to the conclusion that he must be a little baby person. He's the same species as all of us. And so that's why he's asking me, going peep, 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 for food, because he sees me as a potential source of food and the same species as him. And so while he's an amazing ambassador, unfortunately, when these folks released him, because he was big enough and old enough, he was probably flying around the house, right, scratching everything, pooping everywhere. They said, all right, Ferrisburg, it's time for you to go back out into the wild. They had no idea that Ferrisburg had no idea how to survive in the wild. He didn't know how to be a kestrel. He didn't know how to hunt for himself. And so he did the only thing he's ever learned how to do, which is find a human and beg for food. And so a number of people in the town of Ferrisburg ended up calling us because he would land on their shoulders and their head and start peeping in their ear, which is very strange for a wild animal's behavior. So he ended up being captured eventually and brought into our bird hospital, where we were able to give him a full physical exam. He was okay, besides very, very hungry. But he became a permanent ambassador here with us because of that association with humans, which will last him the rest of his life. So let it be a lesson. If any of you ever find any wildlife out there that needs help, try not to bring it home yourself. Ask someone who knows what they're doing, who's had the experience and education and training to properly care for them so that you don't accidentally harm them. But that's Ferrisburg's story. If you guys have some questions about him or falcons in general.
I'm sure that we do. So let's visit our classes again. If you're tuning in via YouTube, use the chat sidebar. Let's check with our crew in Mexico and see if they have a quick question about our kestrel.
They're asking, what is the difference in speed between this and the other falcon?
Yeah. So peregrine falcons are kind of their big cousin that are world famous. They can be found all over the world, but peregrine falcons are about 6 to 8 times bigger than him, so they can dive a lot faster. And the top speed we have for a peregrine falcon in a dive is 242 miles per hour. Yeah, which is ridiculously fast.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Mrs. Fisher's crew.
Hi, we have Waylon here with a question about this friend.
Yeah.
How tall can a bird get?
How tall can a bird get? That's great. So obviously he's not on the tallest bird list, but the tallest bird in the world has to be the ostrich, the African ostrich. They can be like 8 feet tall. Yeah.
All right, very cool. San Diego, Miss Becker's crew.
Hello, my name is Joel. How old is Ferrisburg?
Yeah. Ferrisburg is 5 years old.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I've got a bunch of questions coming here via YouTube, so let's grab a couple of them. Let's see. Do the birds at VINS, do they like to play ever? Do they need to have stimulus, I guess?
Yeah. So play behavior specifically, it's kind of hard for scientists to define and agree upon what play looks like, especially in different animals. But we do give them enrichment, which is kind of the fancy word for we give them stuff to interact with. That might be for some of our raptors, our birds of prey, things that stimulate their natural behaviors. So for a raptor, that might be tearing at something, right? Using that beak and their talons to grab onto stuff. It might be hunting something. We kind of put their food in specific places or kind of hide it so that they actually have to hunt for it. Or maybe we give them an object that they kind of haven't seen before, that they kind of have to figure out what's going on. Maybe there's food in there that they can discover to kind of stimulate them mentally.
All right. I think I see someone back up at Mrs. Fisher's camera, so let me check in, see if they have another question.
My name is Ava. I wanted to ask, how much do they eat?
How much do they eat? So our little American kestrel here, yeah, he eats about 10 to 20% of his body weight per day here with us. Obviously in the wild, he might not eat for a whole day, but he might gorge himself the next day. And so their diet kind of varies out in the wild, but here with us on a day-to-day basis, he gets about 10 to 20% of his body weight. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. A couple more questions from YouTube. Miss Lauren's class would like to know, how can we tell how old a raptor is?
Yeah. How could you tell if you found a red-tailed hawk, for example, just saw it out in the wild? How can you tell how old it is? You probably can't. There's only a very limited window of time when a lot of these birds are young, but they've just left the nest that you might be able to guess about how old they are. So for example, for red-tailed hawks, they don't get their signature red tails until they're about 2 years old. So if you see a red-tailed hawk with not really a red tail, with kind of a brown stripy tail, it might be a youngster, one who's left the nest within the past year or two. And similarly for bald eagles, they don't get that white head and white tail until they're about 5 years old. And so sometimes you can kind of tell, but after they reach that adult plumage, how they look, you might not be able to tell how old they are.
All right. Another question here. This is from, there we go, from Cassie. Cassie wants to know the colors that we see right now. Is that typical, or can it vary a little bit? Can they come in other color forms?
Yeah, so for American kestrels like Ferrisburg here, he's one of a few raptors that you can tell the difference between different sexes. So we know Ferrisburg is male because he has this slate blue on his head and on his wings. And on his tail back there, he's kind of got the one really wide black band. But they do come in these kind of bright colors, even in the wild. A female American kestrel would be more entirely that kind of brown cinnamon color all over her body and have a more stripy tail. But for the most part, a lot of our raptors do kind of look identical between the sexes. But
All right.
American kestrel colors, this is it.
Cool. One more from YouTube. Sharon wants to know, what is there a predator that hunts falcons? Do they have predators?
Yeah, so especially small ones like our kestrel here, he absolutely has to worry about bigger predators, primarily other birds of prey that specialize in hunting other birds. So falcons are not the only bird hunting birds. Our little falcon here, you can see he's potentially prey to something because on the back of his head, he has little spots. Sometimes you can see it if it's a particular angle, but he's got little spots on the back of his head that kind of look like a fake eyes. And that's to help deter predators like Cooper's hawks here in North America in particular. They love to hunt other birds, and he's a relatively small bird, so he has to worry about larger predators.
All right. Very cool. Well, great to see our American kestrel friend.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay.
I can have one more guest if we have time.
We would love one more guest. Absolutely.
All right, so let me get them ready.
Okay. So while we wait for our next visitor to come in, I just want to remind the classrooms that we're going to have a Kahoot quiz shortly. I will put up the link and the pin number for the Kahoot quiz, and we'll see how much you learned about our raptors today, our birds of prey. So we will play that right after we meet our next guest. We'll play that together. Yeah.
All right. Sorry, it took us a moment. We were a little slow today, but we eventually decided we're ready to come on out. This here is an owl. Specifically, though, he is a barn owl. And I always like to enunciate his name because it's spelled B-A-R-N, as in like the big red barn that you have outside at your farm, not a barred owl. Barred owls here in the East have chocolate bars on their chest. He looks a lot more like a toasted marshmallow. And that reflects the differences in these two owls' habitats, or the places where they like to live. Our barn owl here, he likes to hang out near barns. Specifically, though, he likes grasslands, so kind of fields, meadows, grasslands, wide open habitats is where you might find these guys across North America. Now, barn owls, being a nocturnal owl species, meaning that these guys like to be active at night rather than during the daytime like us and many of our other birds of prey, owls kind of have some adaptations to help them be successful nighttime hunters. The first is on his face, something that you can notice about him, and probably how you might have identified that this was an owl even before I said anything, is how big his eyes are. His eyeballs are huge for the size of his head. Specifically, his eyeballs in your head, if you had the same proportion of eyes, would be about the size of your fist. That's kind of nuts. But having huge eyes allows him to see better at night than you and I can. Big eyes let in more light, meaning that he can see a bit better using just moonlight or starlight to find his way around. But if you imagine this bird out hunting in a grassland in a field in the middle of the night, his eyesight alone is not enough to help him to find maybe a mouse on the ground beneath 4 feet of grass. And so instead of just his eyes, he also has some really amazing hearing. Something else you can notice on his face is the shape of his face. You probably noticed that many of our owls kind of have that wide, round, circular face, and it kind of looks like a heart. But that heart-shaped face isn't just to emphasize how cute he is. It is, in fact, a ring of stiff feathers that act like giant ears on either side of his face. Because, believe it or not, his skull, his physical head, stops at the edges of his eyes. And so all of the feathers around his face are just that. It's just feathers. And so his ears, as it were, those stiff feathers are actually bigger than the entire front of his face. Now imagine if you and I had ears as big as the front of our face, we would hear a lot more. And that's our kind of owl specialty, our barn owls in particular. They have some of the most sensitive hearing in the animal kingdom. And some scientists have actually measured just how sensitive their hearing is. And they can actually hear something as quiet as mouse footsteps from 75 feet away, which is nuts. I don't know about you, but I haven't heard mouse footsteps from any distance, let alone that far away. And so our barn owl here uses his incredibly sensitive hearing to find those little mice scurrying through the grass while he's flying above the grass, listening to the ground below. Now, if you guys want to try this, let's see if we can compare something interesting about owls versus falcons. If you had a falcon wing like this with your fingers nice and stiff and went like this, right? Kind of you're flapping your wings next to your own ears, you can hear the whoosh of your hand go by your ear. And it's quite noisy. And if you were flapping your wings next to your very sensitive ears, you might not be able to hear those quiet things like mouse footsteps. And so our owls have evolved nearly silent flight. These owls to us would be flying perfectly quietly over that field. And in fact, they can fly very slowly so that they don't even have to flap their wings as much. And they can also, when their wings do move through the air, is also very, very quiet. And it's thanks to the texture of his feathers. Unlike the falcons, which are kind of stiff and sleek, meant to kind of cut through the air really fast, his feathers are very fuzzy, kind of on the top and bottom surface, and along the edges of those feathers is almost like little fringe, like a little comb sticking off of the front and back of those feathers that helps silence those wings as they move through the air, allowing him to hear over the sound of his own wing beats, which in particular for barn owls might be really important when you need to stop and hover in place before you pounce on those mice. And so barn owls have some pretty cool abilities. Not only can they see better at night, they can hear really well, and they're very, very quiet when they're flying. This barn owl here specifically, his name is Aurora. He is from East Aurora, New York, and he was actually born at a conservation breeding program, meaning that he was destined to be working here next to me, doing education. Because for many, many decades, and still a little bit now, barn owls were in decline and disappearing from certain areas in North America. And so some places like this facility in East Aurora, New York, and another one in Missouri is the World Bird Sanctuary, actually bred these birds for release into the wild. But a few of those individuals, they actually stayed in human care because a big part of conservation is education, telling you guys and everybody else what's going on in the world around us, what problems are our wildlife facing that we should know about, and maybe learn how to do something to help those animals. So for barn owls, because they like to hang out near barns and their favorite thing to eat are mice and small rodents, those things kind of become a little bit tricky because most farmers don't want mice in their barn. And so we might use things like rodenticides or mouse poisons to try to control that mouse problem ourselves. Unfortunately, though, those rodenticides, they don't always act right away. That mouse goes into the barn, they eat the poison, then they go back outside where they could be eaten by one of their potential predators, like this owl. And if he eats a poisoned mouse, he's also eating that poison, which might make him very sick. Or if he eats enough of them, it might even kill him. And so unfortunately, if you make all of the predators in your natural ecosystem disappear, you're going to have a lot more mice the next year. And it becomes this never-ending cycle, right? It's not good for the farmer. It's not good for the wildlife. And so by doing education and conservation breeding at some facilities like where Aurora is from, they allowed these populations to rebound and recover so that people learn about the problem, learn what they can do to help stop any of those declining populations from further decreasing, and then releasing some of them into the wild and doing further education so that you guys can fall in love a little bit and learn a bit more about him. But that's Aurora and our last guest. Do you guys have any questions about owls or barn owls?
Okay, we are going to take some questions, but as we're preparing for the questions, I'm going to launch a Kahoot quiz as well. So we'll take a few questions, we'll play the quiz, and then maybe we'll wrap up with a question or two. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. I want this one. Okay, here we go. If you want to join us for the Kahoot quiz, the address is kahoot.it, and then you need to use the PIN number 432325. That will get you in. And then we will go ahead and we'll play our Kahoot quiz. There's some true and false, there's some multiple choice. If you have a laptop or a Chromebook or a tablet at your seat, you could join that way. If you don't, your teacher could maybe pop this up at the front of the room and you could shout out your answers to him or her. If you can't get in at all, that's no big deal. You can just play along and see how you do. So Maya, while we wait for students to get in, let's take a few questions here. So Miss Fisher's crew, I think I see someone up front.
This is Brantley. He had a question about some of the stuff you were wearing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Why do you have to wear that glove?
Yeah, so some of the gloves that I was wearing, these ones.
Yeah.
So we talked about that these are predators, right? That they are carnivores. They're catching animals to survive. They're using their talons, those long claws at the ends of their feet and their toes, I don't necessarily want those talons in my hand, so I wear a nice leather glove to protect my hand from those talons and make it a little bit comfier for them to sit too.
Caleb. Hurry quick. No, not your picture. Just yourself.
All right, I think someone else is coming up.
This is Caleb, and he had a question about the bite of the different birds.
The owl. How big is their bite rate?
How hard can they bite?
Yeah, what's their
Yeah,
bite?
that's called a bite rate.
The pressure and the
Yeah.
bite.
I don't have a specific number, but it's definitely not as strong as some of our mammals. Some of our birds, like our falcons, their bite is kind of important for them to be able to hunt their food. But for the most part, a lot of these raptors, all their strength is really in those talons and their feet. So I don't have a specific number for you.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to grab another class here. Thank you. Miss Becker's crew in San Diego. Let's get them in here.
Hi, I was wondering how many years have you been doing this job?
Yeah, I've been with Vince for about 2.5 years.
Thank you.
All right. I think things have slowed down with groups joining the Kahoot, so I think we can play our Kahoot together, and then we'll grab a few more questions from the students joining us. Maybe just squeeze this one in from Asher. This one's from Olivia. Olivia wants to know, how many owls do you have at Vin's?
How many owls do we have at Vin's that I get to work with? I believe 6. And then on exhibit that just are permanent residents here, about 10, I believe.
Right.
Counting off the top of my head.
All right, let's play some Kahoot. Here we go. We're going to get counted in a 3-second. Oops, let me make sure that's actually nice front and center. There we go. Okay, here we go. First question coming your way. Vin specializes in what type of birds? Are they songbirds, waterfowl, raptors, or penguins? What type of birds does Vin specialize in? Songbirds, waterfowl, raptors, or penguins? You still have about 15 seconds to get your answer locked in, and then we'll see who's in the lead for now. Oh, all right. Good job, crew. It is raptors. I thought maybe if I put penguin pictures up there, I might have tricked a few students, but it didn't work. All right. Amazon possum is in first place. We're going to go to our next question. You need to pick 2 adaptations for this one. So click on 2 answers for adaptations of raptors. Forward-facing eyes to spot their prey, long legs for wading in the water, sharp talons to grab prey, or thick beaks for cracking seeds. So you need to pick 2 of those adaptations. Click on 2 of them to get this answer right. So forward-facing eyes, long legs for water, sharp talons for prey, or thick beaks for cracking seeds. All right, forward-facing eyes and sharp talons. Good job, crew. In our next question, we are going to have a true or false. If we had eyes like a raptor, we could read a book from across a football field. Is that true or is that false? You have a little shorter period of time to get in your answers for the true or false. If we had eyes like a raptor, we could read a book from across a football field. All right. No fooling this, crew. That is right. That is true. Amazon possum is still in first place. Another true or false coming your way. The American kestrel is America's largest falcon. Is that true or is that false? The American kestrel is America's largest falcon. Got a couple more seconds to get your answer locked in. All right, that is false. They are the smallest. We've got one more question to wrap up. Amazon possum is on fire. You can see a flame right next to their name. Let's go to that last question. A barn owl, not howl, but a barn owl's heart-shaped face helps it fly faster, hear better, hold on to prey, or hide from predators. So which do you think is the right answer? Flying faster, hearing better, holding on to prey, or hiding from predators? All right, that's right. hearing better. So our podium in third place, we've got the expert kitten. In second place, the nimble gecko. And holding down that top spot, no one could catch the Amazon possum. All right, crew, thanks so much for playing along with us. I'm going to come back from that screen share. I'm going to turn off that Kahoot music, and we will wrap up with a few more questions. So let's see, what do we have on YouTube? Kylie would like to know, are owls playful?
Yeah. So similar to the question before about kind of play behavior, it's very difficult for scientists to actually agree upon what does play look like, depending on what animal you're looking at, right? We kind of recognize play very easily in ourselves and in mammals, especially social ones, because they're very similar to us. But for solitary birds of prey, what that play looks like is probably very different. And so sometimes some behaviors you can see that might indicate an owl is feeling curious or kind of investigative is that kind of head swiveling that young baby owls often do. And sometimes adults, when they hear something new or kind of weird and they want to investigate it better, they move their whole head so that they can get a better idea of where the sound is coming from. But are they generally playful? I'd say as adults in the wild, life's pretty tough. And so you don't always have the time and energy to spend playing. And so we don't very often see it in wild individuals. With our owls here in human care, where they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, they can be pretty interactive with their enrichment, or they can be pretty, neutral about it and just kind of like, well, I don't need to interact with that. So I don't have a specific answer. It's kind of very nuanced.
All right. A couple students, Charlotte, Asher, would both like to know predators. Do barn owls have any predators?
Yeah. Do barn owls have any predators? So kind of, especially when all birds are young, they're in the nest, they're a lot more vulnerable to any predator that can get to that nest and might want to eat a small bird, can absolutely do that, but they have to get through mom and dad first usually, which is why they often get a lot of protection from their parents. But even as adults, sometimes other larger owls, especially because they're nocturnal, another nocturnal owl that might want to eat them is something like a great horned owl, which is even bigger and likes to hunt just about anything. And they're pretty strong. And so something like that, during the daytime, if it's unfortunate enough to get caught out in the daytime, might have to worry about competition with other raptors that say, hey, I don't want another predator living in my area. Less predation, but more competition, and say, hey, get out of my spot. Yeah.
All right. Miss Fisher's crew, I see someone waiting.
How old can they get?
Barn owls specifically? Yeah, so barn owls, they don't quite have a super long lifespan. They kind of do the thing where they live very, very quickly, very fast. And so barn owls in the wild might be able to live into their young teens at the oldest.
That's not very old at all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the question. Okay. Miss Becker's crew, I don't know if you're still with us. Maybe you had to duck out for recess. If you are, just give me a wave at the camera. I can bring you guys back in. Bella, though, online would like to know owl's feathers. Mm-hmm. Are they rough or are they, what's the texture of an owl's feather like?
Yeah, so I described kind of all this extra fuzz, right, on their feathers to help them fly quietly. It's pretty soft. And so you can imagine that to fly slowly and quietly, you don't want to just abruptly run your hand through the air, right? It kind of makes a lot of noise. It disturbs a lot of the air around it. And so you want to be as soft and fuzzy and kind of light as possible so that when their wings, their feathers move through the air, they actually bend a little bit. Even in the middle of the feather, they're pretty flexible. And so I'd say they're pretty soft.
All right. We'll take one more question from San Diego. Let's get them in there. Miss Becker's crew.
Hi, I'm Alexis. How many owls are in the world?
Yeah. How many owl species are in the world? I believe it's pretty close to 200 as well, kind of similar to our hawks, if we're including both major groups of owls. So barn owls are actually in their own little family next to all of our other owls. And so pretty similar. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And we'll do one more from Miss Fisher's class because someone's been waiting for a little bit.
How long do they been in their cage for?
How long have they been in the crates over here before they go home? Probably only about 20 minutes before we started this, and then it's been about 40 or so minutes. So
then they go back into like a bigger habitat area.
Yep. Then they have their big enclosures where they spend the rest of their time.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great question. Thank you. Well, let's start off with a shout out to our classrooms. We had great groups on YouTube sending in questions, great camera classrooms. A couple had to duck out for recess, but I still have two with me. So we'll put them in there if they want to do a big wave and a big. So cool to have your classes with us and to learn about our Raptors today. That was awesome. Maya, thank you so much. We always love our trips to Vermont to hang out at Vin's. Thank you for all the work that you and the team does. And yeah, we just love learning about those Raptors.
Great. Thank you guys so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. And hopefully we'll see you in another event soon.